Book not finding himself overly exhausted, Klein rubbed his temples and beckoned over a tiny metallic bottle from the junk pile. Inside it was a tiny tube of blood that he went through great effort to extract from his vein, and he had long brought it above the gray fog. It was only waiting for the opportunity when Klein would use his spirit body to enter Grossel's travels to explore the book world. After opening the cap, Klein wasn't in a hurry to smear the blood over the book's dark brown cover. Instead, he summoned all the items from the junk pile that he had brought to the mysterious space before the tarot gathering, and he spread them out in front of him. In consideration of how the Black Emperor's form was too eye-catching, and with him not too certain of the exact situation in the book world, Klein decided against bringing the card of blasphemy. Instead, he used Azek's copper whistle to fortify his spirit body, to prevent himself from failing to return above the gray fog, before being instantly killed by some unknown power. As the ancient and exquisite copper whistle fused into his body, Klein's spirit body swelled up and became more corporeal. Two pitch-black flames flared out from his eye sockets, as though they possessed a life of their own. With the help of cogitation, he adjusted his spirituality, converging the iciness that stemmed from the aspect of death within his body. Soon his eyes returned to normal. This was like an evil spirit taking on an ordinary form to lure prey into its proximity. Right on the heels of that, Klein wore creeping hunger and held death knell, while he hid the nightmare Bayonder characteristic in his body. The latter was prepared for him to seek out any abnormalities when exploring the dreams of the living entities in the book world. After completing all his preparations, he poured a few drops of blood and smeared it over the cover of Grossel's travel. After a brief wait, his vision turned blurry, as though countless translucent objects were hidden within it. Following that, it turned clear. There were blue skies, white clouds, grayish-brown city walls, and passers-by. This is no longer the land of ice and snow from before, but a city that looks very normal on the surface. Klein stood by the side of the dirt road as he observed the residents of the book world. He discovered that most of them wore linen shirts, a short brown coat, and loose dark-colored trousers. Their overall style was akin to that of the Lone Kingdom centuries ago. He looked down at the format of the tailcoat, starched shirt, and damaged dark red bow tie as he silently changed it all out. Instantly, he was no different from the people around him. He then walked to the city gates in preparation to enter. At that moment, a leather-vested soldier at the gate stopped. "Entrance fees. 1 little. Do I look rich?" "I don't even know what a little is," Klein mumbled, inwardly amused. He then communicated with him at a spiritual level, successfully transferring the soldier's attention onto a merchant caravan behind him. As a quasi-wraith who could possess anyone and control them, exerting a psychological influence on others was nothing extraordinary. It wasn't a particularly potent ability, but it was extremely useful against ordinary people. When Klein entered the city, he walked through the streets in a seemingly relaxed manner, but he inwardly remained wary. He felt that public hygiene was slightly better than Backland a few years ago. It appeared to have a mature sewage system, preventing the situation of any waste and trash being dumped. I couldn't tell that this is an illusory world inside a book at all. Everyone has spirit body threads. Klein proceeded forward as he observed. Suddenly, he noticed a stone building that was more than 10 meters tall to his side. It only had 2 stories, and the top of the door was about 4 meters tall. Beside the building was a signboard. It was written in a language that was completely different from any of the outside world's languages, but Klein instantly understood what it meant: Peso Blacksmith Guild. There's a blacksmith guild. This place really hasn't entered the age of steam. Just as Klein was feeling poignant, he saw the door creak open, and out walked a giant with 4 long limbs. The giant's skin was grayish-blue, and his head had the trademark single vertical eye. In his hand was a huge and heavy sledgehammer. He walked across the street with his lips curled. Humans walking past him didn't show any fear, as though it was a common sight. They even greeted the giant. "Good afternoon, Grossel." Grossel Klein, who was rather face-blind to giants, had his pupils constrict. Only then did he realize the familiarity. He was just about to chase after them when he discovered that the giant had turned into another street, vanishing from his sights. Klein stood on the spot, silently observing the intersection as he came up with a few guesses. There's another Grossel in the book world. No, the ending of the travels is that Grossel died in battle in the Nation of Frost. This is another story. Filled with all kinds of questions, Klein wasn't in a rush to find Grossel. He turned and entered a bar by the side of the street. Such places were often the places with the most messy and multifarious information in a city. It aided him in quickly gaining a grasp of the entire situation. The bar's lighting was dim, and the ventilation wasn't the best, making the air appear somewhat turbid. At that moment, there weren't many customers drinking. Most of the people were by the bar counter, chatting happily with each other or the bartender. Klein slowly walked over when his gaze froze. He saw a man wearing a black pointed hat and an asymmetrical coat by the side of the bar counter. He looked pretty handsome with his flaxen-colored hair, deep brown eyes, a high nose and thin lips. He was none other than the Solomon Empire Viscount, Mobbit Zoroast. Upon seeing him, Klein recalled the scene of the Dream Stealer's rapid aging before he collapsed onto the ground, as he struggled to crawl towards elvish songster Saidas and grabbed her hand. All of that remained clear as day, as though it had just happened yesterday, yet Mobbit had once again appeared before his eyes. Klein's expression grew heavy as he walked over and sat beside Mobbit. He didn't say a word, as he knew that Mobbit was one to start a conversation. "Outsider first time in Peso. I swear I've never met you before." Mobbit put down a cup of distilled liquor as he turned his head to the side. "Tea come from the nation of Frost." Klein randomly cooked up a story. Mobbit immediately laughed loudly. "You're a funny one. This is the nation of Frost, but of course, that was many years ago. Ever since the king of the north was killed by a bunch of adventurers, no heroes, this place is no longer plagued by ice and snow. Everyone believes that it should be called the nation of Neverwinter." Klein fell silent without responding. "Why so serious? It looks like you have your own troubles." Mobbit rapped on the wooden bar counter, showing signs of sympathy. He downed a mouthful of spirits and said, "I'm telling you, men should absolutely not get married. It's the beginning of suffering. Do you know? When she gets worked up a little, she would beat me up. When she's happy, she beats me up. Same when she's embarrassed or angry. Anyway, she beats me up for any reason. From this very moment, I've decided not to return home again. Does this mean you got married to Saida?" Klein kept silent for 2 seconds as he sized up Mobbit's face. He discovered that there were no signs of bruises and swelling on his face. This meant that the elvish songster knew that men needed to put on appearances. He asked with a sigh, "Then why did you marry her?" Mobbit was taken aback as he smiled wryly. "I came here with a merchant caravan. When I first saw her, she was just that beautiful. Her singing was moving and seemed to hide indescribable sorrow. I'm as afraid of her now as I was infatuated over her back then. I definitely won't return. Hey, why do you seem a little sad? You don't have to be sad for me. I'm already free." At that moment, the door to the bar suddenly opened as a beautiful female voice shouted, "Mobbit, come out here. TM counting from 10. Never come back if you don't come home." 10-9. Mobbit immediately jumped up and ran to the door. As he ran, he muttered, "I know you don't have any patience. You always jump to 2 after counting to 8. Klein turned his body and saw Saida's figure, but he no longer had the intention of communicating with her. The real Mobbit and Saida's were already dead. The ones living in the book world were just 2 characters. Standing up and leaving the bar, Klein came to a nearby deserted alley. He planned on confirming the kind of spirit world this world had. He quickly outlined spherical lights in his mind as his thoughts gradually emptied out, and his body and mind became tranquil. As his spirituality spread out bit by bit, several indescribable illusory figures appeared around him. However, up high in the sky, it lacked the 7 lustrous brilliances of different colors that contained endless knowledge. The 7 lights don't exist here. The number of spirit world creatures here are lacking. This place is indeed a fake spirit world created by the book. Klein took a step forward and found the colors in his vision saturate to the extreme as it overlapped with the obvious differences. He wasn't in a rush to explore the spirit world. He exited it and began window shopping through Peso and chatted with others. Before long, he found Grossel's residence. The giant ran a blacksmith shop. He was taking an afternoon nap on a huge bed on the 2nd story. Klein directly entered by passing through the wall and came to Grossel's side. He observed the giant for a few seconds and took out the nightmare Beyonder characteristic from his spirit body. With some difficulty, he used some of its powers that it came naturally equipped with. Deep, serene darkness quickly spread as it instantly enveloped Klein and Grossel. And in a spirit body state, Klein directly saw a blob of irregular, hazy spherical light. His spirituality immediately emanated over and touched the spherical light. All sorts of scattered scenes instantly flashed past around him before fixating on a forest with towering but withered trees. On the other side of the forest was a mountain and steep cliffs. At the top of it was a magnificent palace. The palace was huge and opulent, and it didn't seem suitable for humans. It gave him the impression like it was from a myth, as the light of dusk that scattered above it seemed frozen. Klein had seen this palace before. It was the giant king's court that had appeared in the dream world of the battlefield of the gods. However, this angle was completely different from before. He was situated behind the king's court. Klein turned his gaze to the forest where light could hardly penetrate through its denseness, having gained a rough idea of where he was. This was the waning forest which Grossel guarded when he was at the giant king's court. The trees in the forest were tens of meters tall, and the thickness of the trees was the arm span of several giants. However, their barks were mottled with signs of rot everywhere. The leaves and twigs were mostly withered and dropping, as they interwove with each other like a dark cloud floating in midair. Grossel and similar-looking giants guarded the boundary of the forest, either carrying axes or broadswords, fully concentrating on defending the area. According to Grossel, this waning forest has the bodies of giant King Olmir's father and mother buried in it. Apart from this ancient god, no one else is allowed to step inside, including these guards. Yes, giant King Olmir's parents should be so-called original giants, the kind that was the craziest, cruelest, and most ferocious. Perhaps, why would Grossel have such a dream? As Klein was in thought, he suddenly sensed something amiss. According to his random conversations in Peso, the present Grossel was a native giant who had nothing to do with the giant king's court. Therefore, having such a dream made it appear rather abnormal. From the psychology alchemist's theory which Ma'am Dolly and Miss Justice have discussed before, perhaps the book world will use or clone the original character's subconscious or collective subconscious when creating a character. Then it would make minor changes, making the consciousness fulfill the required setting. Therefore, Grossel's dream will be influenced by his subconscious, reproducing life in the giant king's court. If that's the case, it can only be said that this book is a cruel author. The moment Klein thought of this, he suddenly had an idea. He felt that this was an opportunity for him to gather relevant information on the giant king's court. He previously planned on directly learning about such matters through Grossel. But in order to keep his promise, the giant guardian had died in the battle with King of the North Ulison. After his spirit body left the book world, it quickly dissipated without giving him any chance of communicating. Now he finally had another method, which was to explore Grossel's dream. There had to be parts of it that were ridiculous or exaggerated, but the remaining content had to be a true reflection of reality. As long as an approach of careful study is employed, it's not impossible to distinguish the two. Grossel never entered the waning forest, so the scenes inside must stem from his imagination. There's no need to explore it. Klein slowly cast his gaze onto the mountain where the king's court was. It wasn't tall, which meant that the waning forest was on a mountain rather close to the king's court. It was probably just a straight path from there to the ancient god's residence. Klein didn't waste time searching as he walked straight to Grossel and acted like he knew him well. He asked in a relaxed tone, "How should I return to the king's court?" He knew that Grossel was an honest giant, and he would only be more honest in his dream. Grossel raised his hand to scratch the back of his head as he looked down with a confused look. He said with a smile, "Isn't it simply by taking the barren tunnel?" He pointed ahead and added, "You'll see it when you circle around that boulder." "Thank you," Klein sighed as he said with a bow. As he watched Klein depart, Grossel scratched the back of his head again, muttering to himself in confusion, "Who is he? Why do I find him so familiar?" After circling a boulder that protruded out the mountain, the scene opened up before Klein's eyes. A gigantic cave at least 30 meters tall appeared. Erected outside the cave was a stone stele. Engraved on it was a single vertical eye, a high nose, and plush lips. It looked like a giant's head had been squeezed in to reveal the frontal facial feature. Just as Klein approached, the mouth on the stele opened. "Why are you returning to the king's court ahead of time?" "By His Majesty's orders," Klein said in an unflustered tone. After all, the intelligence level of all the living beings in this dream was equivalent to the owner of the dream, Grossel. The lips on the stele opened and closed as it let out a humming sound. "Please answer a question, otherwise you shall not pass." "If only I brought along arrows, it should be rather fun to see what happens," Klein lampooned as he calmly nodded. Okay. The steel's lips closed for 3 seconds before opening. If your wife, daughter, and a woman you covet ask you to judge which of them is most beautiful, who would you choose? This is completely different from the magic mirror's style. Klein's lips quivered as his mind raced. Using nearly 10 seconds, he answered, My intelligence is insufficient to determine this matter. I will assign someone who is more intelligent than me to give the answer. How can I answer something that can get me killed? He gritted his teeth as he added, Who is this more intelligent person? The giant's face on the steel froze for a few seconds. Klein solemnly answered, Of course it's our king. The steel was shocked beyond words. It took quite a moment before it said, All right, I'll consider it as you answering the question. You may pass. Klein immediately crossed the strange steel and walked into the cave. The ground in the cave was paved with large stone panels that had been weathered. The sides and top of the cave were filled with murals, speaking of stories of the giants and dragons battling the demonic wolves, mutants, devils, and phoenixes. The drawing style was crude, and the color choice was dark. However, it was extremely vivid. Klein walked forward as he observed the murals. He discovered that there were swaths of withered weeds, as well as all kinds of coarse gravel in between the stone panels and the bottom of the mural. And the lack of water and the decline of life became more apparent the deeper he ventured inside. After walking for an unknown period of time, Klein saw a huge grayish-blue open door. Standing on each side of the door was a 4 to 5 meter tall giant. The giants guarding this place were different from Grossel and the others. They wore solid and beautiful iron-black armor and firm, exquisite helm. They looked like two huge statues. They didn't stop Klein and allowed him to pass through the door and enter the hall within. The hall wasn't too spacious. The ends of the hall could be seen clearly, and it could probably only hold 5 to 6 giants. As Klein was observing his environment, he suddenly halted. Then the hall seemed to be pulled up by an invisible hand as it quickly rose. He staggered a little before finding his footing. All he saw were grayish-black walls flashing by as they kept sweeping downward. In about 10 seconds, there was a thud as the hall stopped ascending. At this moment, it wasn't the cave tunnel outside the door, but a magnificent palace propped up by stone columns. Klein briskly left the original hall as he sized up his surroundings with piqued interest. This is the Giant King's Court's elevator. This seems to be the place where the guards live. Outside is a long table taller than humans, with extremely large chairs. On the two sides are rooms, and inside them are neatly ordered beds. Klein swept past the various items in the hall before he stopped at a mural. The mural's main character was a giant dressed in full-body silver armor. As there was nothing to scale, Klein was unable to know exactly how tall he was. The giant stood by the side of a cliff, with a sword in hand pointing diagonally upward. His body emitted a bright halo, like a rising sun illuminating the surroundings. Many giants were genuflecting around him, as though praying or worshipping him and awaiting a bestowment. The Giant King's son, God of Dawn, bade Hilbrun. Klein looked at the face of the mural's main character in thought, and he saw that his face was blocked by a mask. There was only a dawn-like halo coming from his eye. It's very similar to the God of Combat statue in the Backland underground ruin. His face is completely hidden behind a mask. Heh, Queen Mystic said before that the God of Combat is a giant who lived from ancient time. Therefore, their church's headquarters, the Great Twilight Hall, resembled the Giant King's court. Could it be the son of the Giant King? God of Dawn escaped the destruction of the King's court, and at a certain point in time, he managed to retake the authority wielded by his father. Klein made a bold guess, but he lacked any evidence or clues. He used the correspondence principle to look at the wall opposite the mural. There was also a mural there, but the main character was no longer God of Dawn, Bad Hilbrun. Instead, it was a female giant in a leather vest and long skirt. This female giant stood sideways. Her facial contours were soft, and her single vertical eye was focused beneath her. Long dark brown hair reached all the way to her back. Her right hand was spread out as she held items like wheat and fruits. Round her were golden fields, clear lakes, and trees covered with fruits and colorful mushrooms. Giant Queen, Goddess of Harvest Umbella. Klein looked around, but he didn't see the mural representing Giant King Almi. There's no depiction of the ancient god, because this is the residence of remote guard. Then going out from here will likely be the interior of the Giant King's court. Klein carefully walked to the door. He used the method he employed in the dream world of the battlefield ruins of the gods by activating creeping hunger and using the strength of a zombie to open the door. However, there wasn't a palace in the frozen dusk that he had imagined outside. Instead, it was a gray, hazy world. It appeared to be a cliff with a bottomless pit. According to Miss Justice's previous experience, this is likely the boundary of the dream. The only way is to head down and enter Grossel's subconscious. Finally, I'll arrive at the sea of collective subconscious. Miss Justice discovered a mind dragon in the human sea of collective subconscious where she was. Then, in this book world created by the dragon of imagination, what would be contained in the sea of collective subconscious? Klein's mind word, he conjured a staircase that led down into the hazy world. The staircase didn't head straight down, but spiraled around deep into the gray haze. The bottom couldn't be seen, nor were any of the details of the mind world that were possible to discern. After silently observing it for a few seconds, Klein walked forward as he got onto the staircase and carefully walked down it. The surrounding light gradually dimmed with a gray, hazy luster that enveloped the extremely silent world. The moment Klein proceeded down the staircase, he felt more and more like he was being locked inside a dark, silent room. Slowly, his ears could hear his sloshing blood and his beating heart. The latter sped up as it was invaded by panic and horror, which he could hardly keep in check. Klein focused his mind as he imagined the stacks of spherical light so as to stabilize his emotions and recover. To his side, a grayish-white cliff coldly stood there, a representation of the domain of Grossel's consciousness. It was silent as though it were dead, but the surrounding grayness would occasionally coruscate. Klein focused his gaze and saw that in one of the points of light, there was a giant who ripped apart a human before stuffing it into his mouth, as well as Grossel panicking. Back then, the latter was less than 3 meters tall, and it was clearly still an adolescent. The point of light flashed past, appearing in the frozen dusk that scattered over the mountain peak. Time here seemed to become impeded. Klein was just about to seek out any valuable information in Grossel's subconscious when he suddenly heard sounds akin to a beast's panting. With a whoosh, a huge palm appeared from the surrounding hay. Its skin was grayish-blue and was covered with signs of rot. On it was an obvious yellowish-green liquid as it quickly grabbed at Klein's ankle. Amidst the panting sound, similar palms rose up one after another from the staircase below, as though they were attempting to forcibly pull Klein's spirit body into the mind world's darkest and most unfathomable zone. Instantly, these rotting palms formed a dense horse as they kept struggling upwards and let out sounds of horrible, hair-raising panting. It made Klein instinctively jump up 3 steps. However, the countless palms that belonged to giant corpses didn't stop. They squirmed along the staircase as they surged upwards, covering every inch of space. Klein was just about to reach out his right palm to draw Death Knell, and use purifying bullets combined together with Death Knell's slaughter ability to finish off the countless monsters when 2 questions suddenly flashed in his mind. Where do these palms come from? Why would they be inside Grossel's subconscious? The moment this thought came to mind, his spiritual perception was triggered. Klein came to a realization as he immediately abandoned his thoughts of using Death Knell. He calmed his breathing and imagined the spherical lights. The huge, rotting palms took this opportunity to reach his feet as they grabbed his calves and ankle. At that moment, they silently vanished as though they had never appeared. Indeed, this is an illusion created by Grossel's subconscious. Here, minds don't just face each other, but they interact with them as well. If one lacks the corresponding Beyonder powers, the deeper one goes, the easier it is to have an emotional breakdown. Intrusion by the other party's subconscious will slowly happen until one's Beyonder powers are severely tainted. As a result, one will become a mental patient that will never be able to recover their rationality, and this might very well lead to a loss of control. This is different from communicating with spirits. Corruption isn't avoided simply by maintaining lucidity and reason. This is because one is already inside the target's Beyonder powers, Klein muttered to himself, having figured out something. He hesitated for a few seconds before turning around to climb back up the stair. He gave up on venturing deep into Grossel's mind world because he lacked the Beyonder powers to placate his own mind. Insisting on heading down was equivalent to suicide. I'll consider exploring again after I find a mystical item that targets this aspect. Klein determined his thoughts as he walked faster. Finally, with a leap, he returned to Grossel's dreamscape and returned to the guard's quarters in the giant king's court. He already felt exhausted, so he immediately left the dream, walking out of Grossel's blacksmith through the walls before observing the wonders of the book world. I've already met Grossel, Mobbit, and Saida. And while I was casually chatting with others, I also heard of the devout priest, Snowman, and the philosopher, Frunzier. However, there isn't an Anderson Hood, Edwina Edwards, Danitz, or J.M. and Sparrow, therefore. Only the dead will possess brand new characters in the book. Or could it be that only those who had stayed in here for extended periods of time, fully expressing themselves as an adventurer in their day-to-day lives, would be able to have their subconscious replicated? As Klein strolled by the side of the street which was illuminated by the setting sun, he considered something that he found crucial. If it were the former theory, where the dead would revive and become new characters, then there was nothing Klein needed to worry about. However, if it was the latter, he had to consider reducing the frequency at which he explored the book, as well as strictly control the amount of time he spent in it each time. There's no way to ascertain it for now. I'll deal with the situation by assuming it's the latter. There's definitely nothing wrong with being cautious. Klein quickly made up his mind and was about to return above the gray fog. At that moment, he saw another familiar figure. Frunzier, with his black hair and blue eyes, was sitting on a long wooden chair by the street. He was staring blankly at the sky, which seemed to be alit in flames, as though he was in thought. Recalling how this lone soldier's ash urn was still with him, he planned on sending it back to the Church of Storms cemetery in Back. Klein silently sighed and walked over before sitting beside him. He asked, as though it was a casual conversation, "What's on your mind?" Wondering who I am, where I come from, how I should return, Frunzier didn't look away as he said in a dreamlike state. Without waiting for Klein to ask another question, he shook his head with a chuckle. "I ultimately feel that I don't belong here. I'm not myself at the moment, and that there's some place awaiting my return. They always mock me for considering such pointless questions, so they gave me the title of philosopher." As he spoke, he looked at the setting sun and once again fell into silence and looked spellbound. Klein didn't say a word. He sat there quietly and accompanied Frunzier in watching the sunset. Finally, he silently vanished. Frunzier didn't notice that the person beside him had already left. He sat there motionless like a marble statue, looking far into the distance. After replenishing the ship's supplies, Alger Wilson instructed the Blue Avenger to leave the Resistance's private harbor. It wasn't going to stay too long in the Rorsted archipelago. He had to return to Pasu Island to make his report by the designated time. At that moment, in the captain's cabin, he was watching in anticipation at the illusory door that was formed by items with spirituality and a burgeoning flame. It was the door of sacrifice, and it was also a door of bestowment. Midst an illusory creaking sound, the mysterious door slowly opened, revealing an infinite depth and darkness within its interior. Light shot out from within before converging immediately. After everything calmed down, 2 items had appeared on the altar at some point in time. As for the door with all kinds of strange symbols, it was gone. Alger was able to compose himself as he seriously thanked Mr. Fool. He finished the ritual according to the procedure before reaching out to pick up the 2 items. One of them was a piece of paper that had been neatly folded, while the other was a translucent jellyfish that had azure blue seawater in it. Alger inspected the latter and discovered that there were occasional vortexes formed by winds or occasional lightning streaks. And from time to time he could hear a distant, moving voice sounding from it. This voice sounds like a woman's. From the looks of it, this characteristic's owner was a lady. Alger couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. This meant that it wasn't some high-ranking member of the Church of Storms that had been killed. The Church of Storms didn't have any female high-ranking members, quays or not. Putting away the ocean songster's Bayonder characteristic, Alger unfolded the piece of paper. He swept past the main ingredient, and he quickly looked at the supplementary ingredients. Finally, his eyes paused at the ritual. To him, the main ingredients were unimportant, with a Bayonder characteristic in hand. He could look at it later. As for supplementary ingredients, they were rather easy to find, so they didn't need much attention. It was the ritual that was of utmost importance. Drink the potion in an Obninsk's belly. Alger silently read the ritual's contents as the corresponding information quickly surfaced in his mind. Obninsks were ancient sea monsters. They could directly devour a sailboat, and it had a humongous, distorted body. It had as many as 3 heads and many tentacles that entangled with each other. They were the protagonists in many legends at sea. Most of these sea monsters were tamed by the Church of Storm. They had a fixed region of activity, but it was unknown if they had near-human intelligence. It's no wonder the church controls obnisks, and not other sea monsters. It's no wonder there are so many Beyonders in the sailor pathway among pirates, but only a few can reach Sequence 5. Either they directly inherited it, or they're the subordinates of King of the Five Seas or Queen Mystic. Then, where should I find obnisks that don't belong to the church? Alger frowned slightly as he contemplated his advancement that bypassed the Church of Storm. His first reaction was to find Queen Mystic Bernadette through Admiral of Stars Catley. From her, he could find obnisks that didn't belong to the Church of Storm. His second reaction was that it exposed himself to danger. This was because the corresponding obnisks were likely servants of Queen Mystic, and they would report everything to their mistress. Yes, this will be the last resort if there aren't any other choices. Alger's thoughts raced as he quickly had another idea. That was to pray to Mr. Fool. This reawakened existence secretly wielded the former authority of sea god Calvatua. He could commandeer undersea creatures, allowing him to know where to find obnisks that didn't belong to any faction. There's no need to rush it. If I were to advance now, I won't be able to hide the advancement from others, because of my lack of control over the spirituality dissipation. I can perform the prayer after I make my report and leave Pasu Island. Alger calmed down and memorized the ocean songster formula. Then he moved the piece of paper to the tip of the candle's flame. As he watched the flame devour the formula at an increasing speed, Alger's gaze turned deep. After finishing off the remnant traces, his gaze landed on a sea map and locked onto a location. Banzi. Alger had planned on making a trip to Banzi in passing, while en route to Pasu Island. He wanted to know what the present state of the harbor was. He had already shared his thoughts with his sailors, and no one objected. This was because they were equally curious as to why Banzi Harbor was suddenly destroyed. They were curious what it had turned into. On the future, Frank Lee rolled up his sleeves and began flicking his fountain pen while writing with a smile. My dear friend Jam and Sparrow, I have good news for you. I have successfully cultivated a new breed of mushrooms by using the flesh and blood of a rose bishop. As long as there's fish, it will keep growing. We'll no longer have to worry about not being able to eat mushrooms due to long voyages. Furthermore, it has been crossbred with beef, making it taste excellent. Its only flaw is that there's no way to make it catch fish by itself. External help is needed, but I don't think it's too big a problem. After all, based on what Nina said, it wouldn't corrupt the ocean. Well, let's just pretend she's right. T have mailed you some dried mushroom. As long as you give it water and fish, they will immediately become normal and reproduce by themselves. I hope you will like my gift. After going on and on, Frank finally folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. He stuffed 3 dried mushrooms into it before applying glue and sealing. After doing all of this, he took out the note Klein had given him, followed the description written, and began to seriously prepare the ritual needed to summon the messenger. This wasn't complicated for Frank, so it didn't take long for him to set up the altar and create a wall of spirituality. Finally, he solemnly placed a lone gold coin before the candle. He lit the candle, softly chanted the incantation, and stared at the flame. He watched it burgeon as a headless woman walked out with 4 heads in hand. Frank first jumped in fright before staring at Rionette Tinkier's 4 beautiful blonde, red-eyed heads that looked identical with patience as he muttered, "How was it done? Why are they completely identical? TF planted in soil, will more be grown?" The eyes of the 4 heads held by Rionette Tinkier turned in different directions before uniformly falling on Frank Lee's face. Suddenly, the soil stored inside all kinds of vessels within the room flew out and piled before Frank. Following that, Frank floated up as he tumbled in midair with a shocked expression. He was thrown straight into the pile of soil with his head first. His legs kept struggling as they dangled outside, but he was unable to pull himself out of the soil pile anytime soon. Only then did 2 of Rionette Tinkier's 4 heads reach out forward, separately biting down on the letter and the gold coin. Only after she completely disappeared did Frank Lee finally find the best spot to exert his strength to escape the soil as he fell to the ground. She's powerful, Frank first sighed with a sense of lingering fear. Following that, he wiped the soil beside his mouth, bit into it and chewed on it carefully before muttering to himself, "It's a bit sour." At that moment, Catlia, who had just finished a sacrifice in her cabin, sensed something. Her dark purple eyes subconsciously looked towards Frank Lee's room, and she vaguely saw a crudely made illusory doll. The doll didn't have a head. The scene flashed as Katlia closed her eyes immediately. She felt her eyes were burning, as she couldn't help but have her tears flow out. She knitted brows little by little as she muttered in disbelief, "Ancient Bane." After sending the meteorite crystal and black hunting giant lizard spinal fluid to Miss Magician and Miss Justice, Klein returned to the real world. He lay himself down on a reclining chair as he allowed his body to rock gently. He began considering where he would head to next. With news of Jam and Sparrow's sighting and crazy Captain Connor's victor's matter, it's unlikely that the pirates will openly appear in Bayam for some time. They've either left the harbors or are hiding themselves, making it difficult for others to find them. That is to say that there's no need for me to stay here. The matters regarding the resistance can be directed by responding to them through Sea God or by going through Danitz. I'll head to the Seaweed Bar later. I'll get a fake identity, buy a scalp ticket, and head for Daisy Bay's Canant City. That's not only the biggest harbor around here, but it's also Davy Raymond's hometown. I previously agreed to this Red Glove's request when I released him from creeping hunger that I would pay this beautiful Bay City a visit and tell his daughter that revenge has been exacted. Yes, I'll also think of a way to return the nightmare's Bayonder characteristic to the church. How hypocritical can people be? I'm planning on returning a nightmare characteristic while also planning how to steal a sealed artifact from behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Channy's Gate. Shaking his head, Klein closed his eyes and slept to recover his spirituality. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly felt something as he opened his eyes naturally. He quickly activated his spirit vision. Then he saw Rionette Tinker walk out of the void. This messenger was wearing the same complicated black dress, with a letter clasped in one of the head's teeth. Who mailed it? Danitz, Vice Admiral Iceberg, Frank, or Anderson? Klein received the letter as he nodded in appreciation. Thank you. He was very courteous with his powerful messenger, with a mysterious background. He didn't wish to be strangled to death one day. Do you want to? Immediately. Reply. Rionette Tinker's four heads spoke one after another. Klein tore open the envelope, took out the letter, and opened it to read it. The content alarmed him, as he nearly forgot to reply to her. As for Rionette Tinker, she wasn't quick-tempered. She silently waited by the side. One day, Frank Lee will destroy the world. He definitely needs to be controlled. I can't give him a chance to advance. Seriously, how much does this fellow love to crossbreed and create all kinds of strange plants? The city of Silver is in need of food. A thought flashed through Klein's mind as he had a bold idea. It was to direct Frank's research efforts towards all kinds of food that suited the city of Silver. This way, cows, fish, mushrooms, rose bishops, the sea, and the world would be safe. Klein hurriedly looked up and said to his messenger, Yes, I'll immediately reply. He instantly got up from the reclining chair, walked to the desk, got out a pen and paper, and started writing quickly. Have a question. If you eat the mushroom breed you create, then eat cooked fish and drink a cup of water, will it continue to reproduce? After finishing the reminder, Klein proceeded to the main point. Is it possible for you to create wheat that can grow without sunlight, or cows that can produce milk and meat simply by consuming monster? That seems rather interesting. He continued on this topic and wrote a few paragraphs before folding the letter. He then handed it to Rionette Tinker and, in a natural way, he said the postage will be paid by Frank. Let's hope he isn't dead. After the messenger's four heads said those words one after another, a representative was made to bite on the envelope. Let's hope he isn't dead. Klein jumped in fright. Just as he was about to clarify the matter, Rionette Tinker had already entered the spirit world and disappeared. After contemplating for 2 seconds, Klein wrote a divination statement and used his topaz pendant to confirm that Frank Lee was still alive. He silently heaved a sigh of relief, packed up the dried mushrooms, and rubbed his temples before lying back into the reclining chair. After dinner, at the Seaweed Bar, Klein wore an ordinary-looking face and came here once again. Unlike before, the customers in the bar were mainly mixed blood or natives who had darker skin and curly black hair. They were either part of the gangs in Bayam, or they were secretly working for the resistance, or even both. There weren't many ordinary people, and the commonly seen pirates who often came from different countries were all gone. Only a few people dressed as adventurers were drinking liquor and discussing rumors at sea. Klein swept the bar and found Daniel, who Danitz had mentioned. This thin local could provide him with fake identification documents and scalp ship tickets. Without any apprehension, he went over. A second-class ticket to Canaan for tomorrow and an identification document. Daniel looked up and glanced at him. After some thought, he said, "A total of £20. Just a second-class ticket to Canaan costs around £9. However, scalp tickets are more expensive to begin with. Together with the faked identification documents, £20 isn't too ridiculous." Klein silently did the math before saying, "When can I get it?" "In 45 minutes, Daniel replied like clockwork. "You can pay £5 first, and then pay the rest after receiving the ticket and identification." "All right." Klein didn't harp on the issue as he took out his wallet and pulled out 5 £1 notes. He wasn't worried that anyone would target his wallet, for it might mean that he would save the £20 or even get more. Moments after Daniel checked the authenticity of the notes and was about to inform his subordinates to get working, he suddenly realized that the bar was extremely silent. Klein also sensed it as he subconsciously looked towards the door. There were 2 people there. One was wearing a formal tailcoat and a black trench coat, with brown hair neatly combed backwards. His eyes weren't big, but they were bright and piercing. He had a thin mustache around his mouth, making him exude a gentlemanly feeling while also looking a little sloppy. The other person wore a hooded robe, which was rather rare. His face was hidden in the shadows, making it impossible to identify him. The sloppy gentleman scanned the area and was rather pleased with the crowd's reaction. A silver coin was tumbling in between his fingers as he walked towards Daniel. The hooded person followed behind him, taking out something from his clothes and stuffing it into his mouth, producing crunching sound. The silver coin stopped moving when the sloppy gentleman came in front of Daniel. He said with a chuckle, "Prepare 10 tickets to Pritz Harbor tomorrow for me. They need to be split between 3 different ships." "Yes, Mr. Oder." Daniel stood up in a panic as he replied. Klein momentarily failed to recall who the sloppy gentleman who was tumbling the silver coin in his hand was. Only when he heard the name Oder did he find him familiar. As he was recalling, he saw the man in the hood take out a coffee-colored sweet before popping it into his mouth. He was munching on it, producing the sound. After obtaining an affirmative reply, Oder and the man didn't stay any longer. They walked to the staircase in the quiet atmosphere, and they headed for the second floor of the bar. Daniel exhaled as he turned his head to see Klein looking puzzled. He then said, "Oder. The adventurer Oder who serves the dawn. Remember Silver Coin Viper Oder. He's always claimed that he works for Queen Mystic, but no one could prove it. I can ask Ma'am Hermit later. The last I heard of him was at Daimler Harbor. He was apparently mixing with Admiral of Blood's intelligence officer, Old Quinn. However, the latter has already been finished off by Mr. Hanged Man." Klein instantly recalled many things as he deliberated and asked, "What about the other one?" "Who knows?" Daniel turned his head to instruct his subordinates as he got them to prepare some identification documents and the corresponding ship tickets. Night as Silver Coin Viper Oder wasn't a pirate, there were all kinds of rumors about him, most of which could hardly be verified. Klein retracted his gaze from the staircase and walked to the bar counter. He found a seat at the counter and tapped it. "A cup of Zarhar." This was a locally produced malt beer. It was a lot cheaper than Southville beer that needed to be shipped over from the northern continent. 3 pence. The bartender recovered from his silent state as he picked up an overturned cup. The crowd in the bar began to break out into whispers as they were illuminated by the gas wall lamps. All of them were discussing the reason for Silver Coin Viper Oder's purchase of 10 tickets. He's definitely being pursued by someone. 10 tickets among 3 ships. It's clearly to prevent his pursuers from knowing which ship they boarded. A gang member with his sleeves rolled up, revealing his tattoo, shared his view based on his experience from evading capture twice. Adventure drinking Lanty Proof scoffed. "You don't understand Oder. If his plan was that simple, he wouldn't have the title Silver Coin Viper. He dare bet that he won't be on any of those liners from those 10 tickets. The only thing I can confirm is that they're heading to Pritz Harbor." Another adventurer shook his head when he heard that. Perhaps the news of him heading to Pritz Harbor is fake as well. The gang member from before was taken aback by what he heard. Refusing to be one-upped, he said, "According to your descriptions, Oder has likely thought of what you figured out. That's precisely why he's heading to Pritz Harbor and will be on one of the 3 ships. The 2 adventurers were about to retort him, but they decided that there was quite a non-zero chance of that happening after some careful thought. Momentarily, none of them said a word. This made the gang member extremely happy as he downed the rest of his liquor. Klein was holding a cup of Zarhar as he sipped it while listening to the conversation. He was waiting for the fake identification and tickets he needed. There's another 45 minutes. I hope nothing happens. Don't make the bar into a mess, he silently prayed as he drew the crimson moon inwardly. The light yellow beer slowly dropped in volume while Klein would look at the wall clock from time to time, or at the entrance, hoping that time would pass faster. Half an hour later, the door to the bar was suddenly opened with a loud thud as the evening wind gushed in. No way, the corners of Klein's lips twitched as he held back his urge to smile wryly. He turned his body to look at the sound. Standing by the door were 5 people. Their leader had black hair and brown eyes, with recessed facial features and cut facial contour. He looked Lonese and looked to be in his early 40s. His expression was cold, and he exuded a natural air of dominance. It made everyone in the bar quiet down without realizing it. And the 3 men and the woman behind him were in trench coats. They didn't hide the fact that they were holding revolvers, and that they would instantly aim and shoot if there was any slight sign of abnormality. I don't know them. They aren't on any wanted list or have any bounties on them, Klein mumbled to himself as he maintained his state as a spectator. The 5 intruders suddenly scattered as they came before different customers, bent their backs slightly, and looked at them before asking, "Where is Silver Coin Viper Odor?" The customers were hesitant to give an answer when they saw the black muzzle pointed at them, along with the handle made of ivory and ebony, which exuded a strange sense of beauty under the lights. They went to the 2nd floor. The customers who had been asked nearly pointed to the staircase in unison. Someone is really pursuing Odor. This is an act against Queen Mystic, or has Silver Coin Viper done something himself? Or could it be because of the mysterious hooded man beside him who was eating sweets? Klein drank another mouthful of beer as he saw the intruders send 4 people up to the 2nd floor. One was left behind to continue questioning the customer. Soon, the latter grasped the situation of Odor's request to purchase tickets from Daniel. Immediately, the person walked straight to the thin and dark-skinned black marketer, and he asked in a heavy voice, "Tell me honestly, where is Odor heading with those tickets?" Daniel didn't put on a front just because of his social connection. He forced a smile and said he didn't make it clear. He requested for 10 tickets that are to be distributed across 3 different ships. The departure date is set for tomorrow, with the destination being Pritz Harbor. For real? The questioner was a seemingly radical man in his 20s. Daniel softly replied, "You can ask anyone here." All of them heard it. "Dog's tea." The man shoved Daniel angrily as he turned to walk towards the other customer. Daniel staggered backward and was about to fall and hit his head onto the side of a tiny circular table when he suddenly felt an additional force on his shoulder. Instantly, he regained his balance. He subconsciously looked over and saw that it was the customer who had just requested to purchase a fake identity and scalp ticket. "Thank you, those bunch of military hyenas." Daniel first thanked him before softly saying through clenched teeth. The person who had helped him was Klein. He didn't wish for anything to happen to this ticket scalper. After all, he had paid a deposit of £5. Of course, helping the innocent was also a habit of his. Military hyenas. In Bayam, this description often refers to people from My 9. What did Silver Coin Viper Odor do? Klein silently asked himself, as he eliminated the possibility that someone was targeting Queen Mystic. The lone military, it was meaningless. As he was thinking, the MI9 members who had headed up to the 2nd floor rushed down. As they ran, they said to their partner, "He has long fled through the window." The group of people came and left in a rush. Soon, the bar resumed its usual din, but the still gently wobbling main door proved that it wasn't as calm early. Klein's wait for his fake identification documents and scalp ticket paid off. He didn't need to worry about any possible interruptions. After paying the remaining £15, he left the seaweed bar, and he returned to the ordinary inn he stayed at. "John Yode, this name is way too simple, isn't it? Before I return to Backland, I need to make a more realistic identification document." Klein flipped through the series of identification documents before throwing them inside his suitcase. He took a bath and relaxed, prepared to leave Bayham tomorrow and begin the last stage of his sea travel. At this moment, he heard knocking at the door. "Who is it?" Klein hurriedly took off his bathrobe, wore his clothes and pants, and walked to the door. Outside were a few policemen in black. One of them looked Lonese, while the rest were either mixed bloods or pure natives. "What's the matter?" Klein asked, puzzled. "Please show us some identification," a mixed blood said politely, since the gentleman in front of him was apparently a Lonese. "Thankfully, I just made one. Otherwise, I'll be spending the night at the police station, or I'd have to flee on the spot, change my looks, and redo everything," Klein mumbled as he returned to his room and took out the identification documents. The lone police officer casually flipped through it as he said, "Mr. Yode, are you living alone?" "Yes, everyone in the inn can vouch for me," Klein replied frankly. The Lonese police officer revealed a smile and said, "Have you seen this person before?" As he spoke, a constable beside him unfolded a portrait. On it was an elder who was abnormally thin with white messy hair. Apart from that, nothing stood out. "No." Klein shook his head. "He likes to eat sweets," the Lonese police officer added. Sweets. Klein suddenly recalled the mysterious hooded man behind silver coin viper odor. He had been eating plenty of coffee-colored sweets in a short period of time. After a short deliberation, Klein said without hiding anything, "Perhaps. Back when I was in the seaweed bar, I saw a man who loved eating sweets and was following silver coin viper odor." The Lonese officer didn't hide his disappointment. After a simple word of thanks, he ended the questioning. Only after he knocked on the other guest rooms did Klein close the wooden door and return to the reclining chair. Odor's matter has not only attracted MI9, but it has also got the Governor General's office to send manpower to do a citywide search. "This is quite something," he muttered, and decided to head above the gray fog to browse through the prayer points of light around the sea god scepter. He could gain more information from the prayers of the believers in Bayham. He didn't wish to end up embroiled in a massive maelstrom for giving the wrong response. After entering the bathroom, he went above the gray fog where he summoned the white bone scepter from the junk pile. Swirling around it were countless points of light. As he browsed through each point of light, he determined that the questioning wasn't on a small scale. The target was Odor and the mysterious man, but he couldn't figure anything else out. After some thought, he cast his gaze on a point of light that had been specially marked out by God. It belonged to a mixed-blood policeman named Boulet. He claimed to have swallowed humiliation by changing his faith to the Lord of Storms for the sea god so as to climb up the police ranks. He was already a superintendent. Then Klein cast the sea god's will into the corresponding point of light. Boulet, who was in the police station, assigning work to his subordinates, suddenly broke out into a cold sweat. He hurriedly found an excuse to enter the washroom as he silently prayed. "Blessed of the sea and spirit world, the great Calvatua, your pious believer has something to report to you. The person we are specially searching for tonight is a very thin elder. His hair is completely white, but he has luxuriant hair. It's just very messy. He's very afraid of the cold, and he wears thick clothing even in Bayham. He loves to eat sweets, as though he's a steam engine himself, and sweets are high-quality coal. The higher-ups have informed us to find him, but not harm him." Klein ignored Boulet and reined his thoughts back as he tapped the side of the long table. "Compared to the portrait, such a description gives me a sense of familiarity. It's like I've heard of it somewhere in the past." To a seer, a sense of familiarity meant a clue. Hence, Klein wrote a divination statement and began questioning his spirituality. As he chanted the statement, he leaned back into the chair. He fell asleep with the aid of cogitation. In the gray and dark world, Klein found himself back in Backland, back in 15 Mince Street, which he previously rented. In front of him was the red-eyed Ian. This teenage boy looked up and said, "Tyranny von Helmsuen, the greatest scientist after Emperor Roselle, a mathematician, a mechanist, and the father of the second-generation difference engine." Suddenly, Klein woke up and knew who MI9 was looking for. They were finding the great scientist who caused many deaths between the lone military and the Inti spy organization, solely because of a third-generation difference engine. They were finding the science freak who had mysteriously disappeared for years. It's no wonder Admiral of Blood's intelligence officer, Old Quinn, had a modified radio transceiver that surpassed those in Back. Klein was instantly enlightened. Today, after a moment of his mind going adrift, Klein rubbed his temples and slowly composed himself. He discovered that the matter had little to do with it. He wasn't motivated to participate in the matter. He was apathetic to whether the lone military found Tyranny von Helmsuen, because he lacked a sense of belonging to the lone kingdom. What he had done in the past was solely to ensure a stable society, and that its citizens wouldn't suffer any accidental damage. If possible, he didn't mind instigating a revolution to allow the poor to lead better lives. I never expected myself to become more of an internationalist after coming to this world. He gave a self-deprecating laugh as he prepared to return to the real world and have some sleep. Under the cloak of darkness, he would allow the tempest outside to freely unleash its might. At this moment, his attention was caught by the biggest item in the junk pile through the corner of his eyes, the radio transceiver. Speaking of which, what is the faction controlling Tyranny von Helmsuen? It's nothing much if it's people from Queen Mystic Bernadette's side. She's a strong believer of do as you wish, but do no harm, so she wouldn't do anything overboard. It wouldn't be good if it's the Rose School of Thought represented by Admiral of Blood. Ignoring the Temperance faction that's being suppressed, as believers of the chained God or Mother Tree of Desire, their level of vileness can't be lower than the Aurora Order. Letting them grasp the most advanced technology available might bring about a disaster. Klein stopped his actions of wrapping his body with his spirituality. He gently tapped the edge of the model table. He soon had an idea, which was to bring the radio transceiver back to the real world, adjust it to the correct frequency to see if he could receive the telegrams from Admiral of Blood's crew. Then he could use the codebook he had to decipher the communication. There will be a huge sweep of the city tonight. The matter must be at a rather important and intricate point. If the ones controlling Helmsuen are them, there's a possibility of the appearance of crucial telegram exchanges, in a situation in which the Governor General's office, the lone military, and the Church of Storms haven't placed importance or even accepted this technology. This is the safest method. Therefore, Admiral of Blood and Company have a non-zero chance that they wouldn't change the frequency and codes after old Quinn's death. Anyway, I'll just give it a try. After some deliberation, Klein didn't delay as he returned to the real world and busily prepared a bestowment ritual. After bringing the radio transceiver into his room, he didn't immediately use it. Instead, he used a ritual dagger and created a wall of spirituality to seal the room. He was doing it to air out the gray fog smell. There was actually no need to go through so much trouble to confirm the faction that controlled Helmsuen. He could have used the gray fog's aura to contact Arrows and receive the answer. But the problem was that he had posed his questions recently, and the smell that frequently appeared might incur the notice of evil gods like the True Creator or the Primordial Demoness. It was extremely dangerous. Therefore, Klein decided to play safe by relying on himself. After about 8 minutes, when the airing was almost complete, he dispelled the wall of spirituality and controlled the radio transceiver to begin his surveillance. After an unknown period of time, the corresponding frequency received a transmission. Klein held back the joy in his heart as he seriously made notes. Then he flipped through the codebook which he had replicated using divination, and he began the necessary deciphering process. Soon he wrote a line on a note, 32 Black Pepper Avenue. 7 a.m. Tomorrow. Indeed, the people in control of Helmsuen are Admiral of Blood and Company. There might be powerhouses from the Rose School of Thought involved. Klein immediately made a judgment. This wasn't confirmed based on the content of the telegram, but a simple inference from the existence of the telegram itself. If Admiral of Blood and Company were uninvolved, it was unlikely for them to send and receive telegrams involving Bayham streets. The meaning of this telegram is to gather by 32 Black Pepper Street tomorrow before 7 a.m. Does it mean that Helmsuen and Silver Coin Viper Odor are hiding there, and they're reporting to Admiral of Blood of their location and giving a corresponding time? Klein thought for a moment and immediately returned above the gray fog. With the intel he had just received, he wrote the divination statement, Tyranny von Helmsuen's present location. With the paper in hand, he leaned back into the chair and chanted the statement in a raving-like manner as he entered a dream with cogitation. In the gray, hazy world, he saw an underground hall with countless gas wall lamps. Inside the hall was a massive, complicated machine. It was constructed from copper cylinders, operating levers, take-up levers, and countless gears. It took up nearly 2/3 of the space. A thin elder with grizzled, disheveled hair wore a thick coat as he paced in front of the machine. From time to time, he would pop a sweet into his mouth and munch on it noisily. No, it shouldn't be called a difference engine. It's an adorable fellow who can analyze questions and calculate the answer based on a set of procedures. Yes, its name should be a calculator. The elder kept muttering to himself as Klein's vision was pulled upwards and out the underground hall, arriving at the building above. It was a 3-story villa with a garden and lawn. Outside was its address, and it reads, 32 Black Pepper Avenue. He really is here. Klein opened his eyes as he silently exhaled. Then he was stumped about what to do next. A scientist like him is useless to me. Instead, it's the root of many problems. I can't just keep him above the gray fog. Therefore, there's no need for me to personally get involved and take him away. Hand over the news to the lone military or the Church of Storms. This will effectively prevent the Rose School of Thought from obtaining any benefits. But there's a faction in the military that is likely related to the true culprit behind the great smog of Backlash. It's not a good thing to have Helmasuin fall into their hands. The Church of Storms is well known for being rash. A conflict might end up with the scientist meeting the deity he believes in. After some careful deliberation, he gradually had a bold idea. It was to make the news public. He would make the existence and location of Tyranny von Helmasuin known to the Lone Kingdom military and the churches. This could effectively ensure that the scientist's capabilities would be employed by the Lone Kingdom itself, and not any one faction. The key is balance, Klein smiled as he muttered. He then beckoned with his hand for the Sea God Scepter. For the former him, he had to carefully distribute flyers across the city to make a matter public and known to all. But now, he had an even simpler and effective method. He selected a believer who happened to be praying, and then pulled his view back as the surrounding area spanning 5 kilometers entered his vision. Then with the Sea God Scepter, he wielded control of the wind. Once the wind calmed down, Klein's will sank into the scene as he changed his voice, saying with a low roar, Helmasuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. Whoosh! In Bayam, the howl of the wind turned intense as it swept in every direction, bringing with it the deep and loud voice. Helmasuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. Helmasuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. This voice soon spread across Bayam like a broadcast to the entire city. Silver Coin Viper Odor was donning a cloak, pretending to be Helmasuin. He hid himself in a crowded building in the slums, occasionally appearing to mislead MI9 and the Governor General's office's police officer. Suddenly, a gale swept past as the voice sounded in his ear. Helmasuin is at 32 Black Pepper Avenue. What? As the voice resounded, Odor fell into a dazed shock. Without noticing it, he fell from the top of the roof and nearly injured himself badly. Behind the Cathedral of Waves, and in a small nearby building of the Governor General's office, John Cotman and Robert Davis heard the voice in the wind. The first reaction they had was to look up at the sky, before casting their eyes towards the borough where Black Pepper Avenue was. After the broadcast and being in a good mood, Klein threw the Sea God Scepter back into the junk pile and returned to the real world. He wasn't in a rush to bring the radio transceiver back above the gray fog. Instead, he left it there as he continued monitoring the transmission. This way, even if there are powerhouses from the Rose School of Thought hidden in Bayam, they wouldn't dare appear. And regardless who takes action, they'll have no choice but to hand it over to the country. Unfortunately, I don't have the habit of writing a diary like the Emperor. Otherwise, I could write something like, I did another good deed today. Klein silently sighed, took off his coat, got into bed, and slept. He didn't care what was going to happen next, as it had nothing to do with him. After sleeping for an unknown period of time, he suddenly woke up and sat up. Then there was knocking on his door. Who could it be? To knock in the middle of the night, I'm currently John Yode. Klein wore creeping hunger and took out Death Knell from under his pillow before coming to the door. The visitor's looks quickly surfaced in his mind. It was a thin elder with grizzled, disheveled hair. He was wearing a coat stuffed with cotton and a tweed overcoat. He was popping a coffee-colored sweet into his mouth. Tyranny von Helmasuin. Holy FCK. Why is he here looking for me? I'm just the ordinary John Yode. Also, how did he escape the tracking of a demigod? Klein's first reaction was to tell the man that he had gotten the wrong person, but he held back and asked, Who are you looking for? Helmasuin smiled weakly and said, I noticed you when we were in the seaweed bar, however, I didn't have a chance to talk to you. My life is at its end, so I recently recalled many things. Please allow me to introduce myself. You can call me Orange Light Hilarion. Orange light Hilarion. Klein was taken aback before he asked in puzzlement, "Is there something?" Helmasuin chuckled. "TM here to warn you. Be careful of the mother tree of desire." He paused for a moment before saying, "All right, I need to leave, and I'm about to die before returning to the spirit world. Do you have any enemies here?" "Why do you ask?" Klein asked, confused. Helmasuin coughed and said, "I can silently die at their doorstep. That way you would have your revenge." Behind the warning upon hearing Helmasuin's reply, Klein couldn't help but twitch the corner of his lips. He nearly froze on the spot. "My enemies aren't in Bayam. Even if you were to die at Sea King's doorstep, it wouldn't be of much use." He slowly drew a breath and didn't continue the topic. Instead, he asked, "Helmasuin, no, Mr. Hilarion, how did you notice me? You even came here before your death to specially warn me." This was also the puzzlement he had towards Arodes and Rionet Tinkir. He just never had a chance to ask them. With the door in between them, Helmasuin fell silent for 2 seconds. Then he said with a smile in his tone, "There are some tiny unique traits about you. In high-level creatures of the spirit world, it's no secret. It's noticeable as long as they make contact with you in close proximity. After all, the gray fog that represents the great ruler of the spirit world is above our heads. Deities with certain unique authorities or beyonders who represent fate can also discover this point to a certain extent. Of course, the premise is that close contact has to be made. Gray fog, although Orange Light's explanation and Arodes' compliments are nearly identical, he is the first person I've met that directly pointed out the gray fog to me to my face. Therefore, the mysterious space is the divine kingdom above the spirit world left behind by the great ruler. Which sequence 0 pathway is this? The deities who can discover that I'm augmented by the gray fog include the mother tree of desire, so she was able to target me." Klein's thoughts bubbled like boiling water as all sorts of questions popped in his head. Just as he was about to speak, Helmasuin had continued, "In Yellow Light's prophecy, the great ruler above the spirit world is one of the variables of the apocalypse. However, I cannot be sure that you are equivalent to him. There are too many possibilities for you that allow that unique trait. For example, you being his blessed, his child, or his chosen oracle, but none of this stops me from expressing my friendship. Ahem. You know about Backland's stock exchange, right? You're like a railway company that just got listed. You seem to have a bright future ahead. Some people will naturally think well of you and purchase a certain number of shares, but there will be no lack of people who are greedy. They wish to use other means to seize this company or obtain the controlling rights. I'm part of the former, while Mother Tree of Desire and even more powerful spirit world creatures are part of the latter. Is that so? If it wasn't because the transmigrator, Emperor Roselle, who existed before me, had some level of interaction with the gray fog, and if I hadn't divined my origins in that mysterious space and received clear scenes of Earth, allowing me to recall even more of my memories, I would have suspected if I was the reincarnation of the great ruler above the spirit world. Taking everything into account from this experience, Emperor Roselle and I are more like the chosen oracle. The great ruler above the gray fog is equivalent to the celestial worthy of heaven and earth." Klein couldn't help but generate all kinds of conjectures, as his mind was in a mess like a cat playing a ball of yarn. He calmed his emotions and said, "Is there any way to hide this unique trait? Become a demigod?" Helmasuin suddenly coughed after answering, "Do you mind if I die at your doorstep?" "Yes." Klein didn't wish to draw the attention of Sea King John Cotman, Naval Admiral Robert Davis, and other demigods. Helmasuin munched at his sweet and said, "Then I'll have to leave immediately or else there wouldn't be time. After you become a demigod and have the powers to probe deep into the spirit world, we might have a chance of meeting." Klein was silent for 2 seconds before saying, "Thank you for your warning, Mr. Hilarion." Helmasuin didn't reply as he lumbered to the staircase. As he listened to the footsteps down the stairs, Klein focused. Suddenly, he had a certain theory about why Emperor Roselle had failed to enter despite discovering the existence of the gray fog. He restored that silver plate which resulted in his transmigration far after he became a Bayon. As for me, I was already an ordinary person when I attempted the luck enhancement ritual again. Also, Emperor Roselle chose the savant pathway, while I took the seer pathway. The mysterious space above the gray fog clearly provides great aid in divination. Therefore, the prerequisites for entering the space above the gray fog is to be an ordinary person or be a Bayonder of the seer pathway. as well as knowing of the corresponding incantation, rituals, and symbol. The Emperor's experiments were too late, and he had chosen the wrong pathway, so he naturally had no means of entering it. With how the seer, apprentice, and marauder pathways are considered neighboring pathways, perhaps the former two would work too. Could this be the deeper reason why the Emperor made the poignant point in his diary that he should have chosen one of these three pathways? Apart from not having any sequence 0 for these three pathways, preventing any influence from the peak, it's also the key to entering the gray fog. As his thoughts churned, Klein placed this matter, which he couldn't obtain any confirmation of, at the back of his mind. He began considering Orange Light Hilarian's warning. Be careful of the mother tree of desire. Due to the incident as Admiral Amirius, Klein was rather wary against the mother tree of desire. He had no choice but to change his identity and use the need for him to act, so as to hide for 2 months. Subsequently, he wasn't too willing to provoke Admiral of Blood and other members of the Rose School of Thought, afraid that he would fall into a trap. Towards the extreme danger lurking around, a normal human's first thought was to resolve the matter. It was likewise the same for Klein. However, the problem was that he had no solution. The mother tree of desire was suspected to be a sequence 0 true God located in the astral world. Even if Klein jumped up, there was no way he could hit her or defeat her. And the faction, the Rose School of Thought, that she controlled was an organization with quite a long history. It likely had angels presiding over it and had grade 0 sealed artifacts. Otherwise, it was very difficult for them to survive to this day with the churches and all the secret organizations at odds with it. Therefore, even if Klein had plans of getting the help of Mr. Azik or other powerful figures, there was no way he could uproot the Rose School of Thought. It was even possible that they would encounter danger. Due to these reasons, Klein could only hide and hope that he could successfully advance to Sequence 4 and become a demigod. I've always been careful against the mother tree of desire. Mr. Orange Light Hilarion didn't know that I once fell for the evil god's trap at Oravi Island. Or did he specially come over to warn me that she would be doing something major soon? He was previously under Admiral of Blood's control, and Admiral of Blood is a member of the Rose School of Thought. He might very well know of something. Klein was instantly alarmed. He didn't just blindly believe that a faceless transformation was enough to fool the mother tree of desire's attention. According to Orange Light Hilarion's explanation, she would be able to discover certain unique traits when in close proximity with me. This is something the faceless Beyonder powers are unable to match. She hasn't done anything in a while. Could it be that she is attempting to use this sensation to bestow something to her believers through some ritual or item, and that she is about to succeed soon? Klein slowly frowned as he felt that it was certainly a possibility. This made him more eager to return to Backline. In that huge city, even angels had to behave themselves, just like a particular snake of fate. The believers of the Mother Tree of Desire and the powerhouses of the Rose School of Thought were unable to act as they wished. All they could do was wait for an opportunity. Klein exhaled and headed above the gray fog. He divined if his life would be in danger soon. This time he received a negative answer. His life wouldn't be in danger. However, Klein didn't relax as a result. He recalled that the Mother Tree of Desire's divination interference could penetrate the gray fog's shielding to a certain extent. And very long ago, his spirituality had prevented him from divining the werewolf Beyonder characteristic above the gray fog. This was because it might very well involve the Chained God, and the Chained God was suspected to be another manifestation of the Mother Tree of Desire. Either there's really nothing going on and that I'm overthinking matters, or the danger is already very close. That's why the Mother Tree of Desire took action to interfere. To be safe, I need to make preparation. Even if it's proven to be a false alarm, it's still better than being captured by the Rose School of Thought and taken away by the Mother Tree of Desire to perform some unspeakable matters. Klein immediately returned to the real world and took out a pen and paper before quickly writing a letter. He started with, "Dear Mr. Azik, considering how the underworld was inside the spirit world, that the demigods of the death pathway were considered high-ranking spirit world creatures in a certain way, and that Mr. Azik might be able to see his unique trait after he recovered his memory." Klein was rather honest. He directly wrote about the entire conversation between Orange Light Hilarion's manifestation, Helmasuin the scientist. The only thing he left out was about the gray fog, and the parts about the great existence above the gray fog. Finally, he mentioned something. Does Mr. Hilarian's warning imply that I'll suffer mortal danger from the Rose School of Thought? After he folded the letter and blew the copper whistle to summon the messenger, Klein still didn't find it safe enough. He hurriedly took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew into it. Silently, Rionette Tinker appeared before him. Each of the four heads with blonde hair and red eyes rotated and said, "There's no letter. T have something to discuss with you." Klein forced a big smile. He handed over the gold coin he received from Anderson and said, "This is the fee for the summoning." One of the heads, Rionette Tinker, held bid onto the gold coin. The two other heads that didn't get the chance to speak asked, "Well, one shset, T might face a certain degree of danger soon. I wonder if it's possible to summon you for help." Klein tried his best to make his eyes look sincere. The 8 eyes on Rionette Tinker's forehead darted around as they said, "Yes, pay 10,000 gold coins, 10,000 gold coins. That's 10,000 pounds. Klein turned agape as he said with a wry smile, "I don't have that much money." Rionette Tinker's four heads spoke one after another. "You can pay by installments." Installments. Klein was surprised that his messenger kept with the time. After 2 seconds of shock, he said, "All right." Rionette Tinker didn't say anything else as her four heads nodded simultaneously before disappearing in front of Klein and returning to the spirit world. Upon seeing the messenger disappear, Klein thought of the demigods he could contact on short notice, but he realized that there weren't any. All he could do was turn his attention onto what he should do next. The citywide broadcast must have made C. King John Cotman not only find Helmasuin, but he would also do his best to search for C. God and the traces of his believer. It's easy to be detected if I leave in the middle of the night, so I can only choose to stay here until daybreak. I can't take that ship tomorrow. If I encounter an attack midway, I might affect everyone on the ship. Furthermore, it's not discreet enough. I can summon an undersea creature and leave by riding it. I can rest and switch rides on the deserted islands and reefs we encounter along the way until I arrive at the next port. Since Orange Light said that the unique trait can only be detected at close distances, it still won't exceed the size of a city, even if the Mother Tree of Desire tries to expand her perception range to find me via a ritual or her believer. It might even be limited to the size of a particular street. This is also why I encountered a trap when I arrived in Oriv. As long as I leave Bayam, I should be able to escape from their gaze. While Klein's thoughts gradually turned clear, he suddenly heard a signal from the radio transceiver. He hurriedly went over and quickly jotted it down. Then, with the codebook, he transcribed the corresponding words into a single sentence. Before long, the telegram's content appeared on paper in jet black. "TCU. I see you." When Klein read those words, he felt a chill run through his heart. Bayam, in an ordinary residence not far from the Governor General's office. In a spacious basement, there were candles silently burning, scattering their dim glow around the surrounding. Silver coin Viper Odor had already taken off his hooded robe. He looked at the middle-aged man opposite him as he trembled. He said with a quivering voice, "Lord Senner, I don't know how Helmasuin's real hiding place was known by others as well." Senner wore an old triangular hat. His eye sockets were recessed, and his face was shockingly pale. He looked more like an evil spirit than a human. He raised his hand to stroke the 2 black mustaches above his lips as his light brown eyes coldly swept across Odor's face. In response, the well-known adventurer couldn't help but lower his head. After observing him for a few seconds, Admiral of Blood, in his white trousers and red coat, said with a deep voice, "Less than 3 minutes after that telegram was sent, it was spread across the entire city. And the message spread was part of the telegram. T suspect that another faction has begun paying notice to radio transmissions, and they had obtained our codebook from Old Quinn." Yes, it has to be the case," Odor hurriedly echoed, hoping that Admiral of Blood wouldn't pin the loss of Helmasuin as him being inept. He knew very well that this pirate admiral was cruel to subordinates who made mistakes. Senner swept his gaze at Odor and sneered. "Regardless, you failed. TF not for you and your mistress giving me plenty of joy, I would have gotten you to dig out your intestine. Send a telegram. Tell that listener, who might or might not exist, that I can see him. Let him spend the night in horror and unease. This is the only thing you need to do now." Upon hearing that, Odor immediately heaved a sigh of relief. He glanced at Admiral of Blood in trepidation, and the bloody altar behind him before reverently replying, "Yes, Lord Senner." He felt that he would have become part of the sacrificial items just moments ago. After Oda retreated out of the basement, Senner turned his head to look at the altar covered with human heads, organs, limbs, and blood. He said in a manner even more reverent than how Oda treated him, "Lord Shanks, has the ritual succeeded?" "Yes. All that's left is to wait for God to respond." A cold, unfeeling voice sounded from the drooping curtains around the altar. Then the curtains seemed to possess life as they rolled up on both sides, smoothly forming a knot before landing in the middle of the altar. A somewhat translucent figure peered by the side of the altar at some point in time. His skin was slightly brown, and his wrinkles formed deep crevices. His white, thinned hair was like leaves in autumn, as though they had lived for many, many years. He humbly fixated his gaze at the candlelight with his brown eye. Senner didn't dare say a word as he stood beside Lord Shanks, awaiting for any changes to happen to the altar. Suddenly, the candle's flame was dyed with all kinds of color. Each color seemed to correspond to the different desires of an observer. Heads, organs, limbs, and blood on the altar moved by themselves as they stacked up together, forming the state of a melted candle. Before long, they formed a tree of flesh and blood that wasn't too tall. Its surface was uneven, resembling the shell of a walnut. Plub, plub, plub. The interior of the tree of flesh and blood seemed to have a heart beating forcefully with strength. When Senner was about to succumb to the din, the tree of flesh and blood instantly withered, rotting into slosh and collapsing. There was a tiny, flesh-colored, moist, sticky ball left behind. Soon, the tiny ball grew 4 limbs and a head, turning into a palm-sized humanoid creature. Its face didn't have any eyes, nose, or ears, other than a pinhole-like mouth. In its mouth, grayish-white fog spewed out before converging back in. It repeated several times without stopping. The elder named Shanks devoutly and passionately chanted the name Mother Tree of Desire, and reached out to grab the strange tiny figure. Silently, all the candle lights were extinguished, but to a wraith who had night vision, this didn't affect them from seeing things. Senner observed Shanks and heard this important person say in a deep voice, "We've prepared for a long time for this ritual, and God's grace can help us sense the existence of the target through a wider range. Next, we can use the glasses made by the life school of thought to accurately locate it." As he spoke, Shanks took out a monocle from his inner pocket. It didn't look any different from a normal monocle, but it coruscated with a pearly white luster in the darkness. "Lord Shanks, what should we do next?" Senner asked respectfully. The wrinkled Shanks thought for a few seconds and said, "Seek out the target after daybreak. If he has powerful helpers, we will monitor him and prevent him from leaving our detection range. Then patiently await Lord Sua's arrival. If he doesn't have any guardians and is weak himself, then we shall take action directly." After hearing the word Sua, the corners of Senner's forehead twitched as though just the mere mention of this important figure's left him apprehensive. He slowly took a deep breath and said, "Yes, Lord Shanks." After answering, Senner instinctively touched the necklace by his chest. The necklace seemed to be made of pure silver, and the pendant looked like an ancient coin. Klein, who didn't get much sleep for the rest of the night due to the fright from receiving the telegram, immediately sacrificed his suitcase, wallet, and most of his cash to the mysterious space above the gray fog at daybreak. After clearing up his tracks, he went to the front desk to check out. He rode a carriage to the borders of Bayam, left the city, and climbed the mountain as though he was heading for a cemetery prepared for locals. Midway through his journey, he suddenly took a detour into the woods and planned on walking straight to the cliffs where a massive undersea creature was waiting underneath for him. The birds chirped and the insects buzzed in the woods as critters would occasionally scuttle by. Klein walked through the humic material-covered grounds at high speed. Along the way, he saw mushrooms growing after the rain, torn cloth, and rubbish which the Bayam residences had left behind after a picnic. Everything seemed so serene, alongside the fresh morning air. A leaf fluttered down as Klein didn't stop and easily dodged it. At that moment, the leaf's speed sped up and did a surprising bend, clinging to him in between his lips and nose. It was like an adult's palm that clasped his mouth and nose tightly, making it impossible for him to breathe. Sue, Sue, Sue. The surrounding trees had their branches fall off as they shot at Klein like sharp arrows. And the rubbish left from the picnic received a life of their own. They formed an airtight net as they came looming over. Very important suddenly, Klein had a familiar feeling. It felt like every tree, every leaf, every rock, every blade of grass wanted him dead. Upon seeing the rubbish comprising of fragments and paper lunge at him in a strange web, his body suddenly collapsed into a paper figurine. Sue, Sue, Sue. The arrow-like branches impaled the paper figurines and landed into the distance. As for the strange net, it immediately enveloped everything within into a ball as it gently squirmed. Klein's body appeared to the side about 8 meters away. He knew that the attack he was worried about had finally descended upon him. He didn't make any observations or show any hesitation. Raising his right palm, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the adventurer's harmonica. The situation he had encountered had made him realize that the attacker was likely a demigod from the Rose school of thought. It was an enemy he was currently unable to defend against. The one who had been pursuing Sharon back then gave him a similar feeling. At this moment, the paper figurines in his pocket suddenly flew out as they plastered over his face, one after another, layer after layer. At the same time, Klein's sleeves automatically tightened as they bound both his arms, preventing his palms from reaching down. His Taraba shirt and brown jacket were tightening like a bear, giving him a hug. In seconds, he was bound on the spot by his clothes, trousers, and shoes. His face was covered with paper figurines, as his ribs were on the brink of fracturing. He found it abnormally difficult to breathe. Klein was mentally prepared and was equipped with rich combat experience, so he didn't panic. His right thumb and middle finger, which weren't affected, touched each other as he snapped his fingers. At his ham, scarlet flames immediately soared up, burning the tightly bound trousers clean before spreading upwards and downward. Seizing this opportunity, Klein bent his knees and jumped up with great difficulty, like a cannonball that weakly fell to the ground moments after being launched, as he lunged to his right. In midair, he snapped his fingers again. This time, the sleeve by the right arm joint was ignited. As for the spot where he was originally standing, the green weeds suddenly withered as the blackened ground suddenly turned white as if it had been weathered by the elements. This attack was silent and deadly, without any forewarning. Klein knew that his enemy was powerful, and that staying in the same spot would likely result in him suffering an attack he couldn't resist. Therefore, he first removed the influence on his legs. If he hadn't done so, he would have already been heavily injured and lose his ability to do combat. He might have even perished. With a smacking sound, 2 spots around Klein's sleeves ignited. His right palm finally had the freedom to move as he reached into his pocket and grabbed the adventurer's harmonica. Plop! He fell to the ground, rolling as he immediately stopped himself with his right hand to bounce up. His left palm, which wore a human-skinned glove, snapped its finger. This time, his target was the paper figurines that were plastered over his face to prevent him from breathing. Puh! The paper figurines burned up as the scarlet tongues of fire burned Klein's hair. At that moment, a scene suddenly flashed in his mind. An icicle had formed and was speeding right for his head like a thin, gloomy green arrow. Due to its speed, it was translucent itself, making it usually impossible to discover it. But even though Klein's danger premonition was triggered, it was a little too late. This was because his clothes were still affecting his mobility. It was too late for him to dodge the attack. A thought flashed through his mind as he barely bent his back. His upper torso was bent backward, and he moved quite significantly to his right. Oof! The thin, cold ice arrow struck his left chest, instantly shattering the brown jacket and white round collar shirt which were located there as they scattered into the air. However, this lethal ice arrow didn't continue heading forward. This was because in its way was a book with a dark brown cover. The book appeared ordinary, and it was bound into a book with commonly seen yellowish-brown goatskin, but it didn't shatter like the 2 pieces of clothing. There wasn't even a hole pricked open. Grossel's Travels. This was an item that even the sea god Scepter's lightning storm imbued with some powers of the mysterious space had failed to damp. Last night, the telegram of "I see you" gave Klein such a fright that he undoubtedly reinforced his protective countermeasure. He prepared every method he could think of. Apart from hiding the book at his vital spot, his other pocket had the iron cigar case which stored the influence of the corrupted true creator. Once things went bad, he would dispel the wall of spirituality, throw out the item, and see if it would draw the attention of the true creator. He hoped that he would send his powerful subordinates to make the situation more chaotic. He knew that even evil gods like the true creator hated the mother tree of desire. After withstanding the ice arrow, Klein fell to the ground while somersaulting to the side. He then brought the adventurer's harmonica to his lips and blew hard into it. At that moment, his face was turning a little black due to the burning of the paper figurines, but due to flame controlling, he wasn't injured. Then he felt that the clothes on his left arm, waist, thighs, neck, and legs were restored to normal, giving him newfound freedom. At the moment he blew the harmonica, he quickly activated his spirit vision. He saw Miss Messenger walk out of the void with 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand. They automatically turned and stared at the same spot. One of the heads grunted as it opened its mouth and began drawing in air. A cold wind hummed as a figure was forcibly pulled out from a green tree, 100 meters away from Klein. This figure failed to maintain his difficult-to-detect state, as he rapidly turned half-transparent and half-corporeal. He was the wrinkled elder with white, thin hair. His facial features had the traits of the people of the southern continent. Just as his brown eyes reflected Rionette Tinker, his brows pricked up. Then he didn't hesitate to open his mouth, as though he was about to deliver an extreme curse that he had been preparing for a long time. At this moment, another one of the heads which Rionette Tinker was holding had opened its mouth as well, as though it was making a silent screech. With that, nothing happened inside the forest. When Shanks saw this, he hurriedly turned his head to look at Klein, who had yet to react in time when a figure with white, thin hair and exaggerated wrinkles appeared in his eye. His mind instantly turned cold. Although his thoughts weren't impeded, he had lost control over his body. All he could do was watch the white-haired elder vanish as he turned to face Miss Messenger. The 2 heads which Rionette Tinker carried suddenly flew out and appeared before Klein. One of them opened its mouth as it drew in air, while the other's red eyes turned dark as its teeth turned long and sharp, phasing between an incorporeal and corporeal state. Klein saw the translucent elder with white, thin hair being forcefully pulled out from his body, before Miss Messenger's head with the long teeth that bit at his shoulder, tearing out an object that appeared both like a spirit body and a physical body. Shanks frowned without screaming. Its figure abruptly vanished as it leaped to spot with a glass fragment 100 meters away. Following that, he seemed to be pursued by formless hands and enemy. He kept phasing into shallow puddles of water, the eyes of animals, the dew on plants, etc. Finally, he was able to catch a breather, and still, Klein was feeling a little stiff and cold from the inside out. Shanks entered the spirit world and walked out again. In his hand was a moist, sticky palm-sized doll. This figure's face only had a hole as it was inhaling and exhaling a grayish-white fog, which Klein found familiar. Shanks didn't hesitate as he stuffed the doll into his mouth. Upon seeing this, Rionette Tinker's other 2 heads left her palm and, like before, flew towards Shanks at a fast speed, arriving nearly instantly. However, Shanks had already begun transforming. His body turned black as his skin scrunched up and water began seeping out. His hair, brows, and other parts began withering and dropping. Following that, his limbs grew long and thin. In just a second, Shanks seemed to be assimilated by the doll, becoming a huge black, moist infant with long 4 limbs and swollen, shriveled skin. His eyes, nose, mouth, and ears moved from their original locations to the middle of his face, as though they were gathering together to form a brand new organ. His skin, limbs, and newly formed organ brought an indescribable sense of mystery and wickedness. Just a single look had made his body, which had just recovered from the coldness, feel extremely itchy. Red spots protruded from his skin as a result of the clumps of fine granule. His eyes undoubtedly suffered a piercing pain. He instinctively closed them tight as tears were forced out. By the time he calmed himself with cogitation and opened his eyes again, he realized that Miss Messenger and the Rose School of Thought's demigod had vanished. However, Klein's spiritual intuition told him that they were nearby. They were in an intense battle shuttling between the real world and the spirit world. Be it the dropping of the leaves, the shaking of the weeds, the crawling of the worms, and the fleeing of the wild beasts, all of them represented each and every clash. As his mind whirred, Klein took out Death Knell and tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice. Countless illusory, thin threads appeared in his eyes, making him see objects that usually couldn't be seen with his normal vision or spirit vision. 2 blobs were flying around him, and the dense black bundles of threads that entangled with each other were Rionette Tinker and the Rose School of Thought's demigod. Apart from these, Klein also discovered that a blob of illusory black threads was rapidly approaching him. It would stop from time to time, so as to avoid the intense battle between the 2 demigods. There's another enemy. An enemy who was hiding in the distance awaiting the results, but hasn't decided to participate in the battle. Anyways, anyone who's stealthily approaching in such a situation must be an enemy. Klein's eyes moved slightly as he cocked the death knell, and lowered it naturally to put it into a state for lethal attack. Then he pretended as though he hadn't detected the bundle of illusory black threads, stuffed his left palm into his pocket, and grabbed a gold coin. He made it tumble between his fingers, as though he was in a divination state. He was doing this to disrupt the approacher's spiritual intuition for danger. After losing his paper figurines, this was the only method he had. After patiently waiting for 2 seconds, when the other party was within shooting range, Klein's eyes turned solemn as he suddenly raised his right hand, aimed, and pulled the trigger. Thud! The black revolver with the slightly long barrel recoiled backward as a pale golden beam shot out, heading straight for the spot where the target was about to arrive at. However, the illusory black threads suddenly stopped, as though they were observing something. From his condition, it didn't appear like he had sensed the arrival of danger, but he had his attention attracted by something else. A grayish-white rabbit leaped out the thick grass and fled far away as the tree standing in front of the blob of illusory black threads collapsed due to the gunshot. At the height of a human, a gigantic and irregular hole and a raging pure fire appeared at the tree's trunk, directly splitting it from the middle. Death Knell's might was equivalent to a small-caliber cannon, and its penetrating powers were even more potent. The blob of dense, illusory black threads was clearly given a fright as it instinctively disappeared from where it was, appearing on the surface of a nearby puddle of water. Inevitably, his figure was outlined. He had a pale face with deep recessed eye sockets and light brown eyes. He looked to be in his 40s, had a double mustache above his lips, and wore an old triangular hat. Klein was no stranger to the man, as his bounty notice often appeared before his eye. Step by step, they were stacked into a clear image, Admiral of Blood Center. Just in loan alone, his bounty was worth 42,000 pounds. He had long infiltrated Bayern. Was it to take away Tyranny von Helmsuen? After this scientist passed away due to being discovered, he joined the Rose School of Thought's mission to target me. I seem to have an additional weakness, but before it's triggered, I've no way of knowing what it is. As his thoughts raced, Klein saw Senner's figure disappear once again. However, the traces of Admiral of Blood's existence was rather obvious. The blob of illusory black threads of his was like a firefly in the darkness. It wasn't difficult to identify him at all. The blob of illusory black threads circled around him with the aid of the morning dew, glass fragments, and water puddles that had frozen for some reason. Jumping again and again from one medium to the other, the gap between the two soon narrowed. Klein didn't wait on the spot. Instead, he quickly moved but only slightly shifted his position so as to prevent the Rose School of Thought demigod, who was engaged in an intense battle, from attacking him in passing. Senner's performance made him understand one thing. A wraith's ability to possess someone to directly control their body requires them to enter a certain range. Previously, although the Rose School of Thought demigod was able to accomplish it at further distances, he hadn't done so, perhaps out of contempt or for fear of any accidents. It could be confirmed that Senner was a Sequence 5 wraith. Klein kept changing his location, and he awaited the opportunity when the distance between them was more suitable. Just as Admiral of Blood's speed slowed down slightly, and he was about to possess his target from a distance, Klein's left glove suddenly turned deep black, as though it was formed layer by pure particles. Following that, he said a word filled with foulness, a word that came from the devil language, slow. Senner had sensed it, and changed his position before Klein could even open his mouth. But everything within an 8-meter radius came to a halt. His evasive maneuver had failed to show any effects. It was an area of effect attack. Senner's figure suddenly became slow. He once again outlined his figure in the real world as Klein raised his iron-black revolver, cocked it, and placed his target in his sights. With death knell, he saw that Senner's body was covered with all kinds of colors that indicated his weakness wasn't at his head, but slightly above his throat. Without any hesitation or delay, Klein pulled the trigger. Lethal attack. At that moment, a blob of illusory black threads walked to Senner's side and pulled it in. Admiral of Blood immediately moved diagonally as the golden bullet grazed past his neck, striking a boulder and shattering. A golden flame burst from Senner's neck as it jerked his head up and opened his mouth. A sharp shriek blasted out and entered Klein's ears, causing his mind to hum as his body came to a temporary halt. Formless souls had flown to Senner's side at some point in time, before mixing with cold wind. From the sky and from the ground, they surged towards the enemy. In each of Klein's eyes, a pale-looking man with a red coat and triangular hat quickly appeared and took form. Puh! Klein snapped his fingers as his body was instantly enveloped by scarlet flame. He disappeared from his location before the wraith was able to possess him. And under a tree that was less than 10 meters away, weeds burst into flames as the flames grew bigger and they soared into the sky. Klein nimbly leaped out from it and raised death knell again. He aimed towards the spot where he was originally standing still at, and he injected more than twice the normal amount of spirituality into the gun. Slaughter. Thud. He pulled the trigger as a golden bullet split into countless shrapnel, and with a sacred flame, swept to the region the gun's mouth had aimed at. Formless specters and souls seemed to be swept away by a solar hurricane as they failed to resist and were ignited amidst screaming. Senner knew that a counterattack was in place once his possession attempt didn't succeed. He immediately flashed into a nearby glass fragment in an attempt to evade the incoming shot, but the bullet hurricane brought about by Slaughter was a rather huge range that included that glass fragment. Amidst a huge boom, golden flames struck the sides of the glass without hitting it. With only burn injuries, Senner leaped to another mirror surface and appeared on the surface of a rolling drop of dew a distance away. His body had a rotting wound thanks to the purification powers, but it wasn't anything serious. There's no way he's that lucky, right? Indeed, Senner has a mystical item that makes himself lucky. There are only 3 purifying bullets left. Klein frowned as he agilely ran over as though he was in pursuit. As he knew that he was facing members of the Rose School of Thought, he had changed all the Beyonder bullets in his revolver to purifying bullets that targeted wraiths and zombies. There were a total of 6 bullets, and now he had already shot thrice. In the first shot, Senner was saved by a rabbit that suddenly leaped out. In the second shot, he was yanked away by the Rose School of Thought's demigod who happened to come beside him. In the third shot, he happened to be in the gap of the fragment amidst the Slaughter hurricane, preventing him from suffering too much damage. Klein found this level of luck completely unacceptable. However, Klein didn't wallow in depression. Instead, he turned back into Jamin Sparrow's appearance and build. This was for him to immediately throw a bunch of sea god domain charms to create a certain commotion once things went south, so as to attract the attention of Sea King John Cotman, who was in Bayam City. If this Sequence 3 demigod were to arrive, he would be facing a Rose School of Thought demigod, a hostile pirate admiral, and an adventurer with a mysterious background who had certain ties with the military. It was quite obvious who he would deal with first. As for Miss Messenger, Klein believed that she could escape into the spirit world in a timely fashion, and was free to choose whether to participate in the battle royale or leave. The reason why Klein didn't escape in the middle of the night, after receiving the telegram last night, was because Sea King gave him a sense of security. If he were to leave alone, he would definitely be noticed and captured by the Church of Storm. He would be interrogated, making the subsequent developments unpredictable. If he were to stay in his room and await the person who saw him to attack, he had a chance of struggling until he reached the streets, allowing Sea King to notice it. Faced with an evil operative who was at least a demigod and a Sequence 5 adventurer who was rumored to have ties with the military, there was no doubt that John Cotman would first deal with the Rose School of Thought member. And as a cardinal of the Church of Storms and a high-ranking deacon of the mandated Punishers, he could use various sealed artifacts of the diocese. He could last a moment, even if he faced an angel. At the same time, with the reinforcements from the military, there was a chance for Klein to escape to the sea during the chaos and leave via whale. To his regret, the night remained peaceful after he received the telegram. And once daybreak happened, Sea King would find it difficult to monitor the entire city. Puh! Klein snapped his fingers again, igniting the surrounding tree. This appeared like blooming fireworks around him, as they exuded an inexplicable sense of beauty. The reason why he had chosen to pass through the forest ahead for the cliff was because this was a place that was suitable for a magician's performance. His figure flashed through the flames as he circled around Senner, avoiding his approach and control. And from the previous experiences and lessons, Senner knew that his target had an area of effect attack and a damaging blow. He didn't dare stay too close to him, and he would pull away and create a gap once he missed an attack. Otherwise, he would use a wraith shriek to affect his target, or use his pale green fingers to aim at his target. Unfortunately, The latter could only extinguish flames and wither vegetation. There was no way to pinpoint Klein's location. Seeing how the fireworks like flames were the biggest barrier to his attacks, Senner stopped and let out the deafening shriek which would also damage a spirit body. Amidst the shriek, the icy blue halo beneath his feet rapidly expanded, covering the mud, randomly strewn weeds, and scattered rocks with a layer of ice. The flames sizzled as they produced tiny amounts of mist before being extinguished by the frost. Klein was influenced by the wraith's shriek, causing his flaming jump to be one step too slow. He ended up failing. His figure projected itself midway as his feet stumbled. Then he saw illusory skulls swirling with black gas rush at him, bringing with them the strong smell of death, as though an envoy from the underworld had arrived. At that instant, Klein didn't seem like he could dodge. However, a light blue fireball emanating the smell of sulfur suddenly condensed before him. His glove remained black as it remained in its devil state. With a thumping sound, the fireball was extinguished as the illusory skulls shattered and scattered to the ground, creating spots that didn't have any life to them. Right on the heels of that, Klein steadied his body and took out the iron cigar case from his pocket. He threw it at Admiral of Blood Senner, as his glove turned noble and sinister at some point in time. Baron of Corruption bribe. Senner obviously wasn't going to bet that the item thrown by his opponent didn't pose a threat. Immediately dodged far away, allowing the iron cigar case, which was sealed by a wall of spirituality, to fall to the ground. Then he opened his mouth once again and produced a shriek. A roar that seemed to come from the depths of his own spirit body made Klein experience excruciating pain in his head. Even though he often suffered from the ravings of existences, like the true creator and Mr. Door, and was rather resistant towards such attacks, it was impossible for him to not pause momentarily. He felt his nose burning, as though a capillary had burst. However, with his resistance combined together with bribe, the effects were reduced. It made his momentary pause only last for an instant, and this was something Senner had no idea of knowing. Therefore, Klein pretended as though he hadn't recovered as he revealed his weak state, waiting for the enemy to fall into his trap. In an ordinary battle, as a wraith was able to jump through mirror-like mediums, making it impossible to determine that location ahead of time, it made it impossible to maintain a 5-meter distance from his opponent, even if he created flames and repeatedly used it to achieve phasing. It caused his spirit body threads controlling ability to be disrupted momentarily after there were any significant effects. For this, he planned on taking a little risk. He made his opponent fall for a trap he planned, so as to quickly end the battle and escape to the cliff. Seeing his target appear dazed due to the repeated shrieks, Senner didn't hesitate to make his aura turn deep. Admiral of Blood's contracted figure rapidly appeared in Klein's eyes in an abnormally clear manner. This wasn't a reflection of the world, but two tiny figures seemingly coming to life in his eye. When the wraith's possession was almost close to completion, Klein, with his tattered and charred clothes, unhurriedly extended his left palm as though he was gesturing please as a polite gentleman. Creeping hunger maintained its sinister and noble blackness as it forcefully distorted Admiral of Blood's target. Due to the freezing halo from before, there was frost and crystalline bodies everywhere around them. All of them were equivalent to a mirror surface. On the thin ice, Senner with his triangular hat had appeared there. His expression was as though he was at a loss. At that moment, creeping hunger switched to a deep black state as Klein said a word filled with foulness, a word that came from the devil language, slow. Just as he was about to use the mirror surfaces to phase away, Senner instantly froze. His figure involuntarily outlined itself as his body turned extremely rigid. His attempts had failed. As there was no way to repeatedly use slow, Klein made his left glove turn pale as it was tinged with a slightly dark green color. Zombie. The sealing caused by the frost on the ground had once again exacerbated as they rapidly spread to Senner's side, as they began to spread from his toes to turn him into a completed ice sculpture. With his knowledge that wraiths had a very strong resistance to the cold, Klein didn't let his guard down or waste any time. He made creeping hunger transform as if it was gilded. The illusory black threads in his eyes were hidden away, as two blinding silver bolts of lightning shot out from the innermost depths of his eye. Interrogator's psychic piercing. In his usual state, Senner's fusion of spirit and flesh typically wouldn't be significantly effective. He could even cause the attack to backfire on his opponent. However, having just recovered from slow, he found himself sealed in ice. All he could do was resist the formless bolt that targeted his spirit body. His mind felt as though a blade had penetrated it as it twisted. The pain spread through his body as he temporarily lost all reason. By the time he regained his lucidity and prepared to make continuous leaps to open up a distance, the cold adventurer opposite him opened his mouth once again. Slow. Dog's tea, Senner's actions turned sluggish and impeded once again. Then, without any surprises, he suffered from the two follow-up attacks of ice stun and psychic piercing. When he barely escaped again, the black-haired, brown-eyed Jayaman sparrow opened his mouth a third time with a deadpan expression. Slow. Senner was enraged as he reeled in despair, before finding himself stuck in a perpetual cycle. As for Klein, who had kept his opponent in place 3 times, was beginning to control his opponent's spirit-body thread. In fact, the most effective solution for when his opponent was unable to escape was to take the opportunity to use Death Knell to deliver 2 or 3 lethal attacks. But his past failures had told him that his enemy had a mystical item that allowed him to be lucky. An overly direct and lethal shot might very well lead to an accident, resulting in some undesirable effects. It was precisely because of this that he decided to gradually proceed in the proper order, by controlling Admiral of Blood's spirit-body thread. Time quickly passed. As Klein ran around Senner to dodge the possible attacks from the Rose School of Thought demigod, he controlled Senner's spirit-body threads, and he slowly reached the state of gaining initial control. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second. Senner's thoughts instantly turned sluggish, as though every part of his body was rusting. Klein no longer had the strength to use creeping hunger again. He continued deepening his control as he began walking at an adequate speed. No, I can't let this continue. Thoughts slowly moved through Senner's mind as a translucent icicle condensed in front of him. It was dyed with a gloomy green, as though it was showing its respect to the surrounding forest. As for Klein, who had witnessed his opponent's series of slow actions, he unhurriedly retracted his left hand and took out Grossel's travels from his chest and braced himself. So, the icicle finally shot out, seemingly heading for Klein's chest, but it suddenly changed directions midway as it flew diagonally upward. This adjustment should have been a sudden lethal blow, but as Senner's thoughts had been slowed down significantly, the order received by the icicle had only happened when it was almost reaching Klein. This made the sudden change insufficient to catch Klein by surprise, as he shifted Grossel's travels and easily blocked the attack. Senner's expression turned pale again. After a few seconds of thought, he slowly opened his mouth in an attempt to let out a wraith shriek. Having already prepared himself, Klein spoke first. Bang! An air bullet quickly shot out and struck Senner in the mouth, throwing his head backward as teeth fell. The shriek was left stuck in his throat. Seeing the control deepen and how Senner's resistance was crumbling bit by bit, to the point of losing his reason and launching a barrage of attacks like a lunatic, Klein suddenly felt some joy. At that moment, a shrill, sharp infant's cry sounded and resounded in the wood. Lumps protruded all over Klein's body as he dropped Grossel's travels from his hand. His head felt as though it was being clasped tightly by an invisible hand, making him momentarily lose his senses of his surroundings, including the spirit-body thread. His control over Senner was removed as a result. About 100 meters away from them, the large-sized baby, which was black, swollen, and wrinkled, that appeared to have stormed out of the water, had escaped its illusory state and returned to reality. His limbs were long and thin, and there was only an irregular hole on his face. Circling the hole were gnarling teeth. At that moment, Shank's body had an additional wound that was obvious and deep. It was a piercing wound that went through the black and swollen skin, causing putrid blackish-green liquid to gush out. After this Rose School of Thought's demigod appeared, he stopped dodging or escaping. He began screaming like crazy, letting out infantile screams. It made Klein and Senner fall into a painful stupor. Even their bodies showed signs of losing control. The 4 blonde, red-eyed heads were thrown into the void as they opened their mouths and let out a soundless shriek, silencing the terrifying cry. Rionette, Tinker, and Shanks had engaged in another round of combat, phasing between the spirit world and reality from time to time as they shuttled between leaves, weeds, insect eggs, ice crystals, and thorn. Senner and Klein stood in their spots in a stupor. They tried their best to recover from the effects of the infantile cry. In this aspect, Senner believed that, as a wraith, he had an unsurpassable advantage. The corners of his lips subconsciously curled up a little. He had already figured out what to do with his opponent later. But at that moment, the eyes of the adventurer who was in tattered clothes while exuding a cold demeanor had turned lucid. It had only been a second since the infantile cry had ended. Klein, who was experienced in this, quickly recovered as he realized that Senner was still in a dazed and impeded state. An opportunity. His mind stirred, but he didn't attempt a long-distance attack which allowed for plenty of accidents. Instead, he chose to control Senner's spirit body threads, which took more time. He tapped his right foot as his figure dashed towards his opponent like a panther. His left glove was dark, and when it moved backward, it condensed in a manner that resembled a blade, forming a gigantic weapon formed from lava and flames. Desire Apostle's Sword of Lava. Bam! Klein's body passed by Senner's left as the searing sword swept across his chest and got stuck in the middle. The light blue flames ignited Senner, but aside from suffering damage to his body, he didn't lose his life. However, the pain left him yelling incessantly. After the two brushed by each other, Klein immediately abandoned the Sword of Lava. He took a step to his left and turned around, facing Admiral of Blood's back. He raised the iron-black death knell to his opponent's head. He didn't use lethal attack, and he directly pulled the trigger. With a bang, his body suddenly shook a little. This was because the spot he had stepped onto appeared to be a hole. Hence, Death Knell had slid downwards, and the golden bullet had hit the side of Senner's neck. Blood tainted with a dark green tinge spewed out. Admiral of Blood had lost nearly half his neck as he fell forward. He fainted, but he remained alive. Klein was just about to add another shot when the sky suddenly darkened. An arm suddenly reached out. The arm was 10 meters long, and it had a black sticky surface with strange protrusions. They were either skulls, erected eyeballs, or barbed tongues. The moment it appeared, it made the entire forest shake. All the leaves withered as all the insects stiffened to their deaths. All the beasts either fell paralyzed to the ground, or they began biting themselves wildly, leaving their bodies bleeding. Klein's danger premonition reached its limit. He hurriedly closed his eyes, lunged forward, and did a roll. He grabbed Grossel's travels and held it in front of his face.